Moscow, Russia, August 24, 2025. Another turn has unfolded in the ongoing diplomatic struggle over Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has accused the West of deliberately blocking peace talks, just as a flurry of diplomatic activity appeared to stall. His comments, aired on state television and published by the Russian Foreign Ministry, came at a sensitive moment when international efforts were aimed at bringing Russia and Ukraine's presidents face to face. Lavrov's remarks were sharp and direct. He charged that Western countries are just looking for an excuse to block negotiations, insisting that they want to shift blame away from themselves and from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He accused Zelensky of obstinacy, setting unrealistic conditions and demanding an immediate meeting with Vladimir Putin at any cost. According to Lavrov, this amounted to an attempt to derail what he described as progress initiated by both Putin and US President Donald Trump. "We hope these attempts will be thwarted," Lavrov declared. His words touched on Trump's recent push to broker a summit between Zelensky and Putin. The former US president has cast himself as a peacemaker, claiming he could succeed where past efforts have failed. Yet on both sides, blame continues to circulate. In Kyiv, Zelensky has said repeatedly that he will not agree to direct talks without firm security guarantees and recognition of Ukraine's sovereignty. Moscow, meanwhile, has insisted that such preconditions are unacceptable. For Washington, Trump's efforts are as political as they are diplomatic. He has promoted the idea as evidence of his deal-making credentials, while critics in the US question both the feasibility and the sincerity of Russia's engagement. They point out that previous rounds of peace talks collapsed under mistrust, with each side accusing the other of deception. Many fear that Trump may be overselling his influence, underestimating the hardened positions in Moscow and Kyiv. On the ground in Ukraine, the war continues with brutal regularity. Entire cities bear the scars of bombardment, and millions of Ukrainians remain displaced. For many, the very notion of peace talks without clear guarantees feels like a dangerous illusion. Zelensky has framed the issue bluntly. Negotiations under pressure, he warns, would only serve Russia's interests. Ukrainian officials argue that without battlefield strength, diplomacy could easily become a trap. NATO and the European Union have echoed those concerns. Officials in Brussels caution that any peace deal crafted outside multilateral frameworks risks rewarding Russian aggression while undermining long-term security. This suspicion, in turn, fuels Moscow's claim that the West is less interested in peace than in prolonging the conflict to weaken Russia. Lavrov's remarks seemed aimed at amplifying that narrative. For analysts, Lavrov's message serves multiple purposes. Domestically, it reinforces the Kremlin's claim that Russia remains open to dialogue. Internationally, it casts Kyiv and its allies as obstacles. By highlighting Trump's involvement, Lavrov also tapped into US political divides, drawing attention to the fact that Ukraine has become a contentious issue not just in Europe, but in American domestic politics as well. For ordinary Ukrainians, however, skepticism runs deep. In street interviews, many say they do not believe Russia's talk of peace is sincere. To them, Moscow's strategy looks like a way to buy time, regroup militarily, and demand concessions Ukraine cannot accept. Zelensky has remained steadfast, insisting that Ukraine's independence is not negotiable. Internationally, the G7 and other Western partners have stood firmly with Kyiv. They continue to insist that any settlement must include full respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This unified stance makes Trump's bid for a quick bilateral breakthrough even more complicated, raising the question of whether such a summit could succeed without alienating allies. The triangular dynamic remains at the core of the stalemate. Zelensky demands binding guarantees, Putin insists on recognition of territory under Russian control, and Trump seeks a high-profile deal to claim as historic. History, however, looms heavily over the process. The failed Minsk agreements of the past are a reminder of how fragile and short-lived such diplomatic efforts can be. Lavrov's accusation that the West is blocking peace negotiations is therefore more than rhetoric. It is part of a long-standing Russian narrative that shifts responsibility outward, portraying Moscow as willing to talk but prevented from doing so by hostile powers. Whether this resonates internationally is another matter, but within Russia it reinforces the sense of a country under siege, open to dialogue but spurned by the West. As August 2025 continues, peace talks remain little more than aspiration. Fighting on the ground shows no signs of halting while diplomacy unfolds as another battlefield, one of words, accusations, and political maneuvering. What is clear is that the war in Ukraine is no longer only about territory. It has become a global struggle where narratives, negotiations and strategic alliances are as decisive as weapons on the front lines. They're just looking for an excuse to block negotiations and want it to be seen not as their fault or Zelensky's, who is also being obstinate, setting conditions and demanding an immediate meeting with Putin at all costs. This is an attempt to disrupt the process initiated by Presidents Putin and Trump, which has yielded very good results. We hope these attempts will be thwarted.
И мы надеемся, что эти попытки будут сорваны.